If I tell you that there are stretches of highway that shouldn't exist, would you believe me? You should. Because it was on one of those roads that Mike Torres disappeared, and he recorded everything. My name is Jake, and I've been driving these highways for 30 years, but what I'm about to tell you still keeps me awake at night. Mike was my partner for the last 5 years, hauling cargo across the Midwest. November 15th, 2019. That's the date burned into my memory, the night everything changed. Mike Torres was the kind of driver you could trust with your life. 47 years old, 25 years on the road, and not a single accident on his record. He was obsessive about documentation. Dashcam always running, logbooks filled out perfectly, every mile accounted for. That paranoia about lawsuits saved him more times than I can count, but it also gave us the only evidence of what happened that night. His blue Peterbilt was his pride and joy, maintained like a Swiss watch, and he treated every run like it was the most important cargo in the world. The run started normal enough, electronics from Denver to Chicago. Nothing unusual about the load. Mike called me around 10 p.m. on November 15th, just as he was hitting the Nebraska border on I-80. "Clear skies, Jake," he said over the radio, his voice relaxed and confident. "Should be in Omaha by midnight, maybe grab some coffee at that truck stop we like." The weather report showed clear conditions all across Nebraska that night. Perfect driving weather for a veteran like Mike. But then, around 10:30 p.m., something changed in his voice when he came back on the radio. "Jake, you seeing any weather reports about fog in Nebraska?" he asked, and I could hear the confusion creeping in. I checked my weather app, called dispatch, even switched to the trucker channels. Nothing about fog anywhere in the state. "All clear on my end, Mike," I told him. "Why, what are you seeing out there?" There was a pause, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl before he answered. "There's this wall of fog ahead of me," Mike said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I mean, it's like someone built a grey wall across the entire highway, Jake. Dense as cotton, just sitting there waiting for me." I could hear his engine downshifting, the air brakes hissing as he slowed down. "This doesn't look natural, brother. It's too thick, too perfect, like someone painted it across the road." The static on the radio seemed to get worse when he described it, crackling and popping in ways I'd never heard before. I tried to talk him through it, told him to take it slow, maybe find a place to pull over and wait it out. But Mike was stubborn, and he'd driven through worse conditions than a little fog. "I'm going in," he said, and I could hear the determination in his voice. Dashcams rolling, logbooks updated. If this goes south, at least there'll be evidence. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut, though I didn't know why at the time. Maybe it was the way he said evidence, like he was already expecting something to go wrong. The moment Mike entered that fog, everything changed. His voice came through the radio different, muffled, distant, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Jesus, Jake, I can't see 2 feet in front of me," he said, and I could hear the tension building. "This fog's got a smell to it like wet earth and, I don't know, old metal, rusty metal." The engine sounds coming through the radio were wrong too, echoing strangely, like he was driving through a tunnel instead of open highway. "GPS is going crazy," Mike reported, his voice getting more agitated. "Keep saying recalculating route every few seconds. Signal keeps dropping in and out." I could hear the electronic beeping of his navigation system in the background, constant and irritating. "Mile markers aren't making sense either, Jake. I just passed mile 180, then 165, now I'm seeing 192. That's not how roads work." The fear in his voice was unmistakable now, and it was starting to infect me too. In 25 years of driving, Mike had never sounded scared. Other truckers started chiming in on the radio, asking what we were talking about. "I'm on I-80 right now, about 50 miles behind you," said a driver named Red. "Clear as a bell out here, no fog at all." Another voice joined in. "Yeah, I just came through that stretch an hour ago. Perfect visibility." But Mike was insistent, his voice rising with frustration. "I'm telling you I'm in the middle of it right now. Look, I'll send you the dashcam footage later. But this fog is real and it's not natural." The radio went quiet after that, except for the static that seemed to be getting worse. Then Mike said something that made my blood run cold. "Jake, I've been driving for 10 minutes, but I just passed the same exit sign 3 times. His voice was barely above a whisper now, filled with a terror I'd never heard from him before. "The same goddamn sign, Jake. Exit 126, Kearney, 2 miles. I've passed it 3 times. I grabbed my atlas, checking the route, but there was only one exit 126 on that stretch of I-80. "Mike, that's impossible," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew something was terribly wrong. The static on the radio was so bad now that I could barely make out his voice, and what I could hear was filled with a desperation that chilled me to the bone. I stayed on the radio with Mike for the next 20 minutes, listening to his voice grow more and more desperate. "Jake, I'm telling you, something's wrong with this road," he said, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "I've been driving straight. No turns, no curves, but I keep seeing the same landmarks." The static was getting so bad that I had to strain to hear him, and sometimes his voice would fade completely for several seconds. "There's this abandoned gas station I've passed 4 times now. Same broken signs, same rusted pumps, same shattered windows." His voice cracked on the last word, and I could hear the terror he was trying to suppress. The radio chatter from other drivers had gone completely silent, like they'd all switched channels or turned off their sets. It was just me and Mike now, connected by that crackling, failing signal across the darkness. "My fuel gauge isn't moving," Mike reported, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Been driving for over an hour, but it's stuck at 3/4. That's impossible, Jake. This rig burns fuel like nobody's business." I could hear him tapping the gauge through the radio, the metallic pinging sound echoing strangely. "Everything's wrong here, brother. The clock on my dashboard keeps jumping around. 11:15, then 10:47, then 11:23. Time doesn't work like that." Then Mike's voice changed completely, dropping to a whisper that made my skin crawl. "Jake, there's something else in this fog with me." The way he said it, so quiet and careful, like he was afraid something might hear him. "I keep seeing lights in my mirrors. Headlights, but they never get closer, never fall back. Just there, following me." I could hear him adjusting his mirrors, the electric motor whirring through the radio static. "When I speed up, they speed up. When I slow down, they slow down. But if I try to look directly at them, they're gone." The fear in his voice was raw now, unfiltered, and it was starting to infect me too. "The radio's picking up voices," Mike said, his voice barely audible over the growing static. "Not trucker channels, Jake, something else. They're calling my name." I felt ice water run down my spine as he described it, his voice shaking with each word. "Mike Torres. Mike Torres. You're lost, Mike." That's what they're saying over and over again. But here's the thing that's really messing with my head. They know my full name, my route, even my truck number. I could hear voices in the background now, faint but unmistakable, echoing through the radio like they were coming from a great distance. The sound made my teeth ache with wrongness. I tried to stay calm, to be the voice of reason, but inside, I was falling apart. "Mike, you need to pull over," I told him, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Find a safe spot, shut off the engine, wait for this fog to clear." But Mike laughed, and it was the most horrible sound I'd ever heard. Empty, broken, like something had snapped inside him. "Pull over where, Jake? There's no shoulder, no exits, no rest stops, just this endless road going nowhere." I could hear him hitting the steering wheel, the dull thump of his fist against leather. "I've been looking for a place to stop for 30 minutes, but there's nothing. It's like the road doesn't want me to stop." The dashcam footage would later show what Mike couldn't see in that moment, shapes moving in the fog around his truck. Dark figures that seemed to flow rather than walk, always just at the edge of the camera's vision. "Something's wrong with the cargo," Mike said, his voice now completely devoid of hope. "I can hear the electronics turning on and off back there, beeping and humming like they're alive." The sound came through the radio, random electronic chirps and buzzes from the trailer behind him. "How is that possible, Jake? They're not even plugged in. They're just boxes of circuit boards and computer parts." But I could hear it too, that strange electronic symphony playing in the darkness behind him. "I'm going to try something," Mike said, and I heard his turn signal clicking on. "I'm going to leave the highway, cut across this field, see if I can get out of this fog." The engine note changed as he downshifted, and I could hear gravel crunching under his tires. "Maybe if I can get away from this road, get some distance, I can figure out what's happening." For a moment I felt a spark of hope. Maybe he could escape whatever was happening to him. But that hope died quickly when I heard his voice again, flat and defeated. "Jake, I've been driving across this field for 10 minutes, and there's another highway ahead of me. The same highway, same signs, same mile markers." The radio signal started cutting in and out more frequently now, Mike's voice fading to whispers before crackling back to life. "The fog's getting thicker," he said during one of the clearer moments. "It's not just outside anymore, Jake. It's seeping into the cab, coming through the vents under the doors." I could hear him coughing, his breathing becoming labored. "Tastes like copper pennies and wet concrete. Makes my skin feel like it's crawling." The temperature in the cab was dropping too, according to Mike. His breath was starting to fog up the windshield, despite the heater running full blast. "I can see my breath now, Jake. It's like winter in here. but the outside temperature gauge still says 65 degrees. "There's someone in the passenger seat," Mike said, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. Those words hit me like a physical blow, and I nearly dropped the radio. "Don't turn around. Don't look directly at them," I wanted to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. "Can't see their face, but I can feel them watching me," Mike continued, his voice steady but completely hollow. "Been there for the last few minutes, just sitting there, breathing. I can hear them breathing, Jake." The sound came through the radio. Slow, raspy inhalations that didn't sound quite human. They smelled like rain and old flowers, like a cemetery after a storm. I realized I was holding my breath, afraid that if I made a sound, whatever was in that truck with Mike might hear me too. The last clear transmission I got from Mike was the most terrifying of all. "Jake, I figured it out," he said, his voice eerily calm now, like he'd accepted whatever was happening to him. "The signs, the mile markers, the exits, they're all wrong because this isn't the same road I came in on." There was a long pause, filled only with that horrible static and the sound of his passengers breathing. "This isn't even the same world, Jake. I think I drove off the real highway somehow into something else." His voice was fading now, becoming distant and hollow. "The last sign I passed said, 'Last stop before the end.' Jake, I don't think I'm coming back." The radio went silent after that, nothing but static and the echo of those final words hanging in the darkness. For 47 minutes, I sat in my truck listening to nothing but static, praying that Mike's voice would break through again. I'd pulled over at a rest stop in Iowa, hands shaking as I chain-smoked cigarettes and stared at the radio. Every few minutes I'd try calling his name, but the static just seemed to get worse, like something was actively blocking the signal. Other drivers had started asking about Mike on the emergency channel, but I couldn't bring myself to explain what I'd heard. How do you tell someone that your partner had driven into another dimension? How do you explain that the road had swallowed him whole? Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., Mike's voice came back. But it wasn't the same voice I'd been listening to all night. This voice was hollow, emotionless, like he was reading from a script written by something that had never been human. "Jake, are you still there?" he asked, but there was no warmth in it, no recognition. "I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." The static had disappeared completely, replaced by a clarity that was somehow more terrifying than the interference. "The passenger wants to talk to you now, Jake. They have something important to say." I wanted to throw the radio out the window, but I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. The voice that came through the radio next wasn't Mike's. It was something else wearing his vocal cords like an ill-fitting mask. "Hello, Jake," it said, and the sound made my fillings ache. "Mike has been telling us so much about you, about your routes, your schedules, your favorite truck stops." The voice was Mike's, but the cadence was wrong, the inflection inhuman. "We've been waiting for someone like Mike for a very long time, someone who documents everything. Someone whose disappearance would be noticed." I could hear Mike's breathing in the background, ragged and desperate, like he was trying to speak, but couldn't. "The fog is always hungry, Jake, and it's not finished feeding yet. You want to know what happened to your friend?" the thing asked, and I could hear something that might have been amusement in its voice. "He drove into our world, Jake, through a tear in the fabric of your reality. It happens sometimes when the conditions are just right, dense fog, isolated highways. A driver who's traveled the same route too many times." The explanation came in Mike's voice, but the words were too clinical, too detached. "Your friend is safe, Jake. He's part of our collection now, driving the same stretch of road forever, never aging, never stopping, never finding his way home." The sound of Mike's engine revving came through the radio, but it sounded wrong, too smooth, too constant, like a recording played on loop. I found my voice finally, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Let him go," I said, knowing even as I spoke that it was useless. "He doesn't belong to you." The laughter that came through the radio was the most horrible sound I'd ever heard. Multiple voices laughing at once, using Mike's throat as an instrument. "Oh, but he does, Jake. He signed the contract the moment he entered our fog willingly. Every driver who enters our domain becomes part of our fleet." The voice paused, and I could hear other sounds in the background. Multiple engines, different trucks, other drivers who had made the same mistake. "Would you like to hear from some of our other acquisitions? We have drivers from the 1950s, the 1970s, the 1990s. All of them still driving, all of them still delivering cargo that will never reach its destination." The radio crackled, and suddenly I was hearing multiple voices, all different, all desperate, all trapped. "Don't come looking for us, Jake," one voice screamed. "Stay away from the fog." Another voice, older, more defeated. Been driving the same mile for 30 years, son. Same mile, same cargo, same empty road. The voices overlapped, creating a chorus of despair that made my vision blur. We're all here, Jake. Mike's voice cut through the others. Every missing driver, every unexplained disappearance. We're all here driving in circles, waiting for someone to join us. The voices faded, replaced by the sound of multiple engines running in harmony, a mechanical orchestra of the damned. Your friend left us a message for you, the entity said, Mike's voice returning to that flat, emotionless tone. Would you like to hear it? Before I could answer, the radio crackled again, and Mike's real voice came through, scared, desperate, but undeniably him. Jake, if you're hearing this, stay away from I-80 in Nebraska. Don't come looking for me. Don't send anyone else. His voice was breaking, filled with a terror that cut through me like a knife. Tell my wife I love her. Tell her I'm sorry I won't be coming home. And Jake, whatever you do, don't trust the fog. It's not weather, it's not natural. It's alive and it's hungry. The message ended with the sound of Mike sobbing, a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The message is recorded on his dash cam, the entity said, Mike's voice once again cold and inhuman. Along with 47 minutes of him driving in circles through our domain, the authorities will find his truck in 3 days, exactly where we want them to find it. I could hear typing in the background, mechanical and precise. Everything will appear normal, engine running, cargo intact, fuel at 3/4 of a tank. The only evidence of what really happened will be on that dash cam, and who would believe such a story? The entity chuckled, a sound like grinding glass. They'll call it an unexplained disappearance, file it away and forget about it. But we'll remember, Jake. We'll always remember. The static started returning slowly at first, then building to a roar that made me tear the earphones from my head. Mike's voice came through one last time, fading in and out like a dying radio signal. Jake, can you hear me? His voice was distant now, echoing as if he was speaking from the bottom of a well. The road, it's not the same road anymore. I can see the signs, but they're all wrong. The mile markers go backwards. The exits lead nowhere. His voice was getting fainter with each word, disappearing into the static. I'm still driving, Jake. I'm still driving, but I'll never get home. Tell everyone that this stretch of road isn't safe. Tell them that some roads lead to places you can never escape from. The radio went silent after that, completely dead, as if someone had cut the power to every transmitter in the country. I sat there for hours calling Mike's name into the void, but there was no answer, no sign that he'd ever existed. 3 days later, just as the entity had promised, the Nebraska State Police found Mike's truck parked on the shoulder of I-80, engine running, cargo secure, fuel tank at 3/4. The dashcam footage showed exactly what the entity had described. 47 minutes of Mike driving in increasingly desperate circles through an impossible fog. The last thing recorded was Mike's voice, barely audible, saying, "This isn't the same road I came in on," followed by eternal silence. To this day, truckers report hearing voices on the radio in that stretch of Nebraska, always the same message. Don't trust the fog. Some roads lead to places you can never escape from. 6 months after Mike disappeared, I thought I was done with that stretch of Nebraska highway forever. I'd filed my report with the company, attended the memorial service, and tried to move on with my life, but the nightmares wouldn't stop. Every night, I'd dream of Mike's voice calling my name through the static, begging me to stay away from the fog. I'd wake up in cold sweats, checking my radio to make sure it was turned off, terrified that I might hear those voices again. The company offered me counseling, but how do you explain to a therapist that your partner was swallowed by a supernatural fog that turns highways into interdimensional traps? I started avoiding I-80 completely, taking longer routes that added hours to my runs just to stay away from that cursed stretch of road. But the freight industry is small, and eventually I had no choice. A high-priority load from Denver to Chicago, same route Mike had taken that night. My dispatcher, a good man named Rodriguez, tried to assign it to someone else when he saw my face. "Jake, you don't have to take this one," he said, but we both knew I did. The company was being patient with my trauma, but there were limits to their understanding. "I'll be fine," I lied, signing the paperwork with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. The night I drove through Nebraska again, I was prepared for anything. Backup radio, GPS tracker, even a satellite phone my brother had lent me. I'd told 3 different people my exact route and schedule, with instructions to call the police if I was even 10 minutes late checking in. The weather was perfect. Clear skies as far as the eye could see, and I kept telling myself that lightning doesn't strike twice. But as I approached mile marker 180, the same stretch where Mike had vanished, my skin started crawling with familiar dread. The temperature in my cab seemed to drop 10 degrees, and I could taste copper pennies on my tongue, just like Mike had described. That's when I saw it. Not fog this time, but something worse. A figure standing on the shoulder of the highway, thumbing for a ride in the middle of nowhere. As my headlights swept across him, I saw a face that made my blood freeze solid in my veins. It was Mike, but wrong somehow. His skin was grey and waxy, his eyes reflecting my headlights like an animal's. He was wearing the same clothes he'd worn that night 6 months ago, but they were faded and stained with something dark. The worst part was his smile, too wide, too knowing, like he was in on some joke that I couldn't understand. He raised his thumb higher as I approached, and I could see his mouth moving, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow knew. "Give me a ride, Jake." I floored the accelerator, but my speedometer needle wouldn't climb past 60, like the truck was moving through invisible mud. In my mirrors, I could see Mike jogging to keep up, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by drunk puppeteers. "Come on, Jake." His voice came through my radio, even though I'd turned it off an hour ago. "Don't you want to see your old partner again? Don't you want to know what it's like on the other side?" The voice was Mike's, but layered with something else, something that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. "I've been waiting for you, Jake. We've all been waiting for you to come back." My GPS screen flickered and died, then came back showing impossible information. Mile markers that went backwards, exits that led to towns that didn't exist, a route that twisted and curved through dimensions I couldn't comprehend. "You can't run forever, Jake," Mike's voice continued, now coming from multiple speakers in my cab. "You heard our secret? You know what we are. That makes you part of our world now." The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath fogging the windshield. "Every driver who learns the truth eventually joins us. It's not a choice, Jake. It's destiny." The radio crackled with other voices now, the same chorus of trapped drivers I'd heard that night, all calling my name in unison. I tried to call for help on my satellite phone, but the screen showed no signal, no satellites, no connection to the outside world. The highway ahead began to shimmer like heat waves, and I could see shapes moving in the darkness beyond my headlights. Other trucks, dozens of them, all from different eras. Old Macs from the 60s, Peterbilts from the 70s, modern freightliners that looked like they'd been driving in circles for years. "Welcome to our fleet, Jake," Mike's voice said, now coming from inside my own head. "You'll like it here. Same route every night, same cargo, same destination you'll never reach." The shapes were getting closer, and I could see the drivers in their cabs, pale, hollow-eyed men who waved at me with movements that were too slow, too deliberate. Suddenly, my own voice came through the radio, but I wasn't speaking. It was a recording, and I was hearing myself from that night 6 months ago calling Mike's name, begging him to respond. "Jake, are you still there?" The recording played, and I realized with growing horror that they'd been recording everything, storing every conversation, every desperate plea for help. "We keep all the good parts," Mike's voice explained, sounding almost fond. "Your voice calling my name, your fear, your love for a friend you couldn't save. It's all here, Jake, preserved forever in our collection." The recording continued, playing back my most desperate moments, and I understood that this was my punishment for knowing too much. But then, something unexpected happened. My truck's engine began to sputter and die. The supernatural forces that had been controlling my vehicle seemed to lose their grip as the engine coughed and wheezed. In that moment of mechanical failure, I saw something else in my mirrors. Real headlights, getting closer. Another truck approaching from behind. "Jake, you copy?" A voice came through my CB radio. Not Mike's voice, not the entity's voice, but Rodriguez from dispatch. "GPS shows you stopped. Everything okay out there?" The voice was cutting through the supernatural interference, and I could feel the otherworldly grip on my truck loosening. "No, Rodriguez," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "Nothing's okay. Send help. Send help now." The rescue was anticlimactic, a simple engine problem that had stalled my truck at exactly the right moment. Rodriguez had been tracking my GPS and sent a tow truck when I stopped moving. The mechanic found water in my fuel line, a common problem that had saved my life. But as they pulled me away from that stretch of highway, I looked back and saw Mike one last time, standing in the same spot, watching me leave with those horrible, knowing eyes. He raised his hand in a farewell gesture, and I could read his lips clearly. "See you next time, Jake." The fog was beginning to roll in behind him, thick and unnatural, and I knew that I'd escaped this time, but the road would always be waiting for me. Some highways never let you go completely. They just wait for the next time you have no choice but to drive through hell. 2 years passed, and I convinced myself I was safe. I'd moved to the West Coast, started driving local routes, stayed away from long hauls and interstate highways. The nightmares had faded to occasional whispers, and I'd almost started believing that the supernatural world had forgotten about me. I'd even started dating again, a nice woman named Sarah who worked at a truck stop diner and understood the loneliness of highway life. But deep down, I knew I was just buying time, living on borrowed moments until the road called me back. You can't run from something that exists in every mile of asphalt, in every stretch of highway that cuts through the darkness between cities. That's when I started noticing the signs. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Other drivers would mention strange encounters on I-80, always the same stretch in Nebraska, always involving fog that shouldn't exist. Saw the damnedest thing last week, an old-timer named Carl told me at a truck stop in Sacramento. Thick fog came out of nowhere, and I swear I heard voices on the radio calling my name. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, and I could see the same haunted look in his eyes that I saw in my own mirror. Had to pull over and wait it out, but when it cleared I found this in my cab. He showed me a business card, weathered and stained with Mike's name and our old company logo. Never seen this guy before in my life, but somehow I knew his name. I started keeping a journal, documenting every story, every sighting, every impossible encounter that drivers reported from that cursed stretch of road. The pattern was always the same: fog that defied weather reports, voices on the radio calling specific names, and afterward, some small token left behind as proof. A logbook page with handwriting that wasn't the driver's, a CB radio that wouldn't stop transmitting even when unplugged, a dash cam that recorded things that weren't there. "It's spreading," I wrote in my journal one night, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Whatever took Mike, it's not content to stay in one place. It's recruiting, expanding, turning every highway into a hunting ground. The scope of the horror was beyond anything I'd imagined. Not just one haunted road, but a network of supernatural highways spreading across the country. The first time I saw Mike again, I was in Oregon, hundreds of miles from Nebraska, delivering lumber to a construction site. It was 3 a.m., and I was the only vehicle on a lonely mountain highway when my headlights caught him standing beside the road. He looked exactly the same as that night 2 years ago. Gray skin, reflecting eyes, that horrible, knowing smile. "Hello, Jake," his voice came through my radio, clear as day, despite the distance. "Did you really think you could hide from us?" He started walking alongside my truck, matching my speed effortlessly, his movements still wrong and jerky. "We've been expanding our territory, Jake. Every state, every highway, every lonely stretch of road where drivers go missing." His laughter filled my cab, and I could feel the temperature dropping just like before. "You've been documenting our work," Mike said, his voice now coming from inside my head rather than through the radio. "Writing down every story, every encounter, every sign of our presence. Do you know what that makes you, Jake?" I tried to ignore him, to focus on the road ahead, but his words cut through my defenses like ice. "It makes you our historian, our record keeper, our witness to the expansion of our domain." The journal in my passenger seat began flipping its own pages, and I could see new entries appearing in handwriting that wasn't mine. "Every story you've collected, every driver you've interviewed, they're all part of our network now. You've been building our recruitment database, Jake, and you didn't even know it." The road ahead began to change, even though I was still in Oregon, still on the same mountain highway I'd driven dozens of times. The trees were wrong, the curves were different, and the mile markers showed numbers that didn't exist on any map. "Welcome to our expanded territory," Mike said, now sitting in my passenger seat, his cold breath fogging the windows. "We've been busy since you escaped last time, Jake. Every highway is our highway now. Every truck stop is our truck stop." I could see other vehicles in the distance, the same ghostly fleet I'd glimpsed in Nebraska, but now they were everywhere, on every road, in every direction. "You helped us map the perfect routes, Jake. Your journal gave us the names of every driver who'd had an encounter, every witness who needed to be recruited." I tried to call for help, but my phone showed no signal, and my CB radio was broadcasting voices I recognized. Carl from Sacramento, other drivers I'd interviewed, all of them speaking in that same hollow, emotionless tone. "We're all here now, Jake," Carl's voice said through the static. "All of us who heard the stories, all of us who believed, all of us who couldn't leave well enough alone." The voices multiplied, creating a chorus of the damned that included every driver I'd ever spoken to about the supernatural encounters. Your curiosity was our invitation, Jake. Every question you asked, every story you recorded, every journal entry you wrote, it all led to this moment. I realized with growing horror that I hadn't been documenting the phenomenon. I'd been feeding it, giving it power, helping it spread. But then I remembered something, a detail from my very first encounter with Mike that I'd buried in my subconscious. The entity had said that drivers who entered their domain willingly became part of their collection. But what about those who were forced? What about those who fought back? I grabbed my journal and started tearing out pages, throwing them out the window into the night. "You want my documentation?" I screamed at Mike's ghostly form. "You want my witness testimony? Take it." The pages scattered in the wind, and I could hear the entity's howl of rage as its carefully constructed network began to unravel. Every story I collected was voluntary. Every interview was consensual. You have no power over drivers who refuse to enter willingly. The highway began to shimmer and fade, reality reasserting itself as I drove through the supernatural illusion. Mike's form flickered like a bad TV signal, his voice becoming distant and distorted. "This isn't over, Jake," he said, his words echoing from impossible distances. "You can destroy the journal, but you can't destroy the truth. The stories are still out there, the encounters are still happening, and sooner or later every driver learns that some roads never let you go." The mountain highway returned to normal, but I could still see traces of the otherworldly fleet in my mirrors, fading shadows of trucks that shouldn't exist, driven by men who should have been home with their families. Every highway is haunted, Jake. Every mile marker is a gravestone. Every truck stop is a memorial to drivers who took the wrong road on the wrong night. I pulled over at the next rest stop and burned what remained of my journal, watching years of documentation turn to ash in a metal trash can. But as the flames died down, I could see new words appearing on the charred pages, names and dates and locations that I'd never written, encounters that hadn't happened yet, but somehow already existed in the supernatural realm. The entity was right. The stories would continue with or without my documentation. Every night, somewhere in America, a driver would encounter fog that shouldn't exist, hear voices on the radio calling their name, and make the fatal mistake of stopping to investigate. And every night, the ghostly fleet would grow larger. The network of haunted highways would expand, and somewhere in the darkness, Mike Torres would be waiting for the next curious soul who couldn't leave well enough alone. The road never stops calling, and sooner or later, every driver has to answer.